Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Everyday Heroes podcast. Today, I have someone very dear to my heart coming on the podcast, and she's talking about children who have really big emotions. And I know as parents who are raising autistic children that we see this on a daily. And with children, we've got these intense emotions that come out. And most of the time, us as parents, we don't really know what to do. And we are so desperate to try and co regulate ourselves to be able to co regulate with them that we're still left baffled, not knowing which way to go or what to do. Today, I am joined by Rachel Bailey, a parenting specialist, mother of two, and an expert in child behaviour and emotional regulation. With more than a decade of experience supporting families, Rachel shares practical strategies to help children manage big feelings while reducing stress and guilt for parents. Rachel, thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you for having me here.
Excellent. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. What does it mean to have a child with big emotions? What can you just run that through us?
Yes, and I love starting there because a lot of people have an impression of kids with big emotions always as kids who are melting down or getting really upset when things don't go their way. And that's definitely one definition of big emotions. But I also hear from a lot of parents whose kids, when they get upset, they actually don't get bigger. They almost start to blame themselves. So kids with big emotions may also, if they're making a mistake, say something like, I'm such a bad kid, or I always mess up, or I always get this wrong. So big emotions aren't always turned out. Sometimes they're turned in on our kids. But really what it means in general is that kids have reactions that are maybe disproportionate to the situation. So most parents with kids with big emotions, they sort of know if they have a child with big emotions.
Yeah, definitely. And is that something also that they're modeling maybe off mum and dad? And the question I ask that is because I see a lot of parents, and I will definitely put my hand up at this, where, we are, I'm not doing good enough as a mum. I should be doing more, and this and that. And then do you think that they pick up on that and then they also internalize those feelings as well?
I think you're right, but it's both. I think they may hear us because a lot of the time that's inside our minds. They don't always hear it, but when we do say it out loud, they pick up on that. But I think it's also a natural tendency. There are certain people who cope by turning their feelings out, and there's certain people who cope by turning them in, or there are a lot of people do both. But it can also be a temperament. So I think, like you said, it's both.
Yeah, I love that so much. So a lot of the time obviously in the autistic community, there's a lot of talk about co-regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So, us as parents, we're so desperate to try and be able to co-regulate with our autistic children. But if you are at the bottom of the barrel, you have literally nothing left to give. You're exhausted. Yeah. How do we then manage those big emotions? Like sometimes I have parents come to me and go, I don't have anything left to be able to co-regulate. So when my child has had their next meltdown or had those big emotions, what do I do? How do I manage that?
Yeah. I think there are two big strategies we want to think about. One is that whenever we have nothing left to give, it's because we have been in a threat state for so long. We've so many things going on that we're managing, that we're feeling unsuccessful managing, that this is such commonplace advice, but we do have to make sure we have more space for ourselves. And everybody talks about it. One of the things I differentiate when I talk about this is the difference between self-care and self-treatment. Excuse me, self-care and self-treatment. We self-care giving to ourselves doesn't always mean that we're going to go take bubble baths and get a manicure and nails painted. Just recognizing that sometimes we're beating ourselves up in our own mind, and those things can take a toll on us. So there are things we can change about how we treat ourselves that give us a little bit more energy. The other piece I talk about all the time, all day, every day to the parents I work with is it actually takes less energy to manage a meltdown if you stop seeing a meltdown as a threat. And I know this is going to be like, how could you not see a meltdown as a threat? But it's very possible. I teach parents how to do that every day. And the less we see it as a threat, the less energy it actually takes. So even if we're already exhausted, if we see a meltdown and we are not threatened by it, then our fight or flight response doesn't kick in and we're not wasting all of that energy. So again, the two things I say is just we have to give ourselves space, and that may just mean we're treating ourselves differently. And when we stop seeing it as a threat, it takes less energy to begin with.
So I just want to reinterpret what you just said, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so it's the idea that when we don't see it as a threat, we are calmly sitting next to our child. If they're having a meltdown and they're moving their body every which way. We're just going to sit calmly in a space where obviously we're not going to be struck, but that they're still safe, and giving them that space to be able to co-regulate, but not being able to necessarily touch them. Is that what you mean by that, or am I completely off?
No, you're not completely off. Absolutely, you're on the right track. So basically, any situation in the world is a neutral situation, but the human brain interprets a situation, and we're either going to interpret it as a problem, or we're going to interpret it as something that is not a problem. And it's very interesting. This started way before I was a parenting expert or even a psychologist. I have a sister-in-law who's a lot older than I am. She was raising her kids and I was watching her. I didn't have kids yet. I wasn't even married yet. And she was always so calm with her kids. And I'm not a calm person. So I was like, how do you stay so calm? And she said to me, Rach, they're kids. Why would I get upset? And my mind was blown because she has this attitude when a child has a meltdown, they're a child. It's not the end of the world. And I didn't even realize you could think that way until I started seeing her raise her kids that way. And now as a psychologist, and I've done, way, way beyond where I was then, I realized, oh, wow, we actually have the power to interpret our child's behavior as a problem or not. And literally regulation, because I teach regulation for a living, regulation is as simple as, are you in fight or flight or not? And that's as simple as, do you see it as a problem or not? So I hope that clarified a little bit. It's really our interpretation.
I love that so much. And I really struggle with society looking at children as mini adults. Like, they're not mini adults. They do not have the life experience that we have. They don't have the prefrontal cortex to be able to make those decisions the way that we do. And especially even when you're looking at autistic children, their prefrontal cortex isn't being developed until much, much later in life. So can we just give these kids a bit of a break for a hot minute? And,
Absolutely.
And it was interesting because I had a situation a little while back where two situations, the same sort of thing. It was either my son or it was another parent's child that had walked into an environment where, again, not a meltdown situation, but it walked into an environment where the smells were so strong that they had such a visceral reaction. Mm-hmm. My son was dry reaching. That's how bad it was. And it was because of a scented candle, right? Would I be like, you know what, bro, you just need to suck it up and just like come with me in here? No, because if that was me, I'd be like, I'm leaving, I'm going. I'm not comfortable in this situation. But why would we put our children in this situation where they are feeling uncomfortable? And I know it's not the same thing as having a meltdown, but I really want parents to understand that there is a reason for them having these big emotions. There is a reason why they're having these meltdowns. And we need to honor that in whatever capacity that is so that we can be able to bring it.
100%. And I know there's this thing out there that a sensory meltdown is not the same as a meltdown. But I would say that even an emotional meltdown, like, we can excuse sensory experiences. Oh, their sensory system is overwhelmed. But it's the same thing with emotions. And I'm not sure why emotional meltdowns got such a bad name. Like, they're doing it to manipulate. Well, in my world, if a child is doing something to manipulate, there's an issue. Why would they have to manipulate in the first place? So we see these emotional meltdowns as a bad thing. All it is a child who's dysregulated emotionally instead of from the sensory perspective. So yes, we do have to recognize that those are situations where our children are overwhelmed, they're at capacity. And you're right, why would we expose them to that? Or until, my perspective is, which I'm sure you're aligned with, until they have the ability to deal with those situations. We don't put them in those situations until they know how to deal with them. And then once they have strategies, then we can expose them. But until then, it's just unrealistic that they're not going to have that.
Absolutely.
Reaction.
Yes, it is unrealistic. And I just think that society hasn't quite caught up on, we're still very much like children should be seen and not heard. And we should just, have this very old school mentality that this is not working. And then if you get a child who's outside the box, now it's even more pronounced. And, and you've got a lot of parents, and I used to do this in the beginning, go, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that, he's stimming. I'm so sorry that he's having a meltdown. No, bro, I'm not sorry at all. Like, it is what it is.
And that's why when you first told me about your community, when we first met, I was thinking, and I said to you, yes, we need to be with other parents who experience this. We don't have to feel this need to apologize, and we can make our voices louder that this is not something to apologize for. It's just a symptom that a child is struggling to regulate, or they need some sort of sensory input to soothe themselves. That's all it is. So that's why I love what you do.
Oh, thank you. In terms of going with the flow, right? We've got a situation, an autistic child is in that state where they're feeling extremely overwhelmed, they're having those big emotions. How do we get them to go with the flow, to be able to, because honestly, we're living in a very typical world, right? And
Mhm.
there's as much as we want to have all of these accommodations, and as long as we will do our best to make sure that they can thrive. But sometimes I need to go to the supermarket to buy these
Mhm.
things, and I haven't told you about it, but I need to go. So how does that look?
Yeah. So there are a couple of ways that we help kids, and I mentioned this word strategies before. There are a couple of strategies that we can use to help kids be more flexible. The first is something that we can actually do, which many of us are already aware of, but just preparation for our children. When we prepare them ahead of time, it is so much easier because, as I mentioned, regulation is our brain isn't in a threat state. So when we prepare them ahead of time, they're not in as much of a threat state. But we can also teach kids to see situations that are different as less of a threat, as less of a problem, so they don't become dysregulated. And I happen to teach a specific process for helping kids be flexible. And it's a really quick 3-step process. The first is we help them use the flexible thinking skills that they already have in fun ways so that they start to associate flexible thinking with something that's positive. For example, one of the activities I teach is something called fortunately, unfortunately. And some of our kids, depending on how verbal they are, will be able to do this. And that's basically where we just say a statement like, unfortunately, it was raining. And then the other person who's doing this with us, our child, says, fortunately, I didn't want to go to the pool today, so it doesn't matter that it was raining. And the next person says, unfortunately, I did have to be outside though. And the next person says, fortunately, I had an umbrella. The next person says, unfortunate. So it actually forces cognitive flexibility to go back and forth, but it's happening in an engaging way. And then what kids start to learn as we get to the next 2 steps, which are quick, they learn that flexibility is not uncomfortable. So we do this, and I have a list, and I'm happy to provide this to your audience, of ways to do these flexible thinking activities. Then, once they've done the activities, the second step is to have them practice with what I call safe experiences. So you can say to your child, hey, I went to the store and they didn't have grapes and I really needed grapes. Can we do a fortunately, unfortunately, so I can help myself think about it differently? So we've taught them the activity, we do it with safe situations, and then finally, we do it with situations they're going to be exposed to. Hey, your friend might come over and they might play the game the way you don't want. Can we do a fortunately, unfortunately? And so what we've done is we've taught them how to be more flexible. So preparation is important, but also teaching our kids strategies is important. So that's how we help kids be a little bit more flexible.
I love that because as much as parents want to, we can't control everything in the entire world. We cannot control every situation as much as I'd like to.
Me too.
It might be a bit boring and it might be a bit like safe. Um, it's nice to be able to have some control, and especially if you're a parent of a newly diagnosed autistic child where you feel like everything is out of your control and it's very, very overwhelming. As I feel like as I've gotten further along on the journey, it's less about needing that control and sort of being able to manage his emotions and whatnot. And I've seen that with other parents as well. um, does he have his bad days? Yeah, we all do. We all have our bad days. Sometimes it's just the way it is, right? And we need to make sure that we are allowing for that flexibility on the days that are hard and then giving ourselves, like, I really wish that sometimes I need to play that game with myself, not even with the kids, because it's like, I'm really, really angry that I didn't get to that appointment on time. But you know what, though? I got to hear that really good song on the radio, right?
That's such a great example of how to use this ourselves. Absolutely.
Yeah. Be-
And okay. This is
Go
it's
ahead.
just about managing our minds because again, everything with big emotions and big reactions and things we regret, it all comes down to did we see it as a threat? And when you can say, well, I didn't get to my appointment and I still got to do this, we reduce the threat because our brain doesn't know if there's a threat unless we tell it or not. So we have to manage our mind and recognize where we're telling our brain, yes, this is a threat or a problem. That's when we become dysregulated.
And that also leads into some of the other things that I have seen with autistic parents in terms of the looping, right? Like, or the future pacing. What happens if Bobby can't talk when he's an adult? Like,
Mhm.
but what if he can? right?
Mm-hmm.
But if he's not able to talk, well, then he'll be able to have other ways of being able to communicate, whether that's through an AAC, whether that's through the letterboard. Like, it's so many, but we're so wired as humans, right? Because we have our caveman days to like what to expect, what's going to happen in the future in order to fail proof anything that's going to come up. And I think that that's where autistic parents really fall into that trap of not being able to manage those threats as effectively as they could.
Absolutely. And you nailed it when you said that's how our brains are wired. So I love that you're not judgmental about the fact that we go to the negative. And that's also why I say let's start in the negative because it's there anyway. Let's acknowledge our fears. I'm worried that my child might not be able to speak, when they're an adult. And then we say that's the unfortunately. And there's always another side. And then we have to ask ourselves, who do we want to be? Do we want to be the person that stays stuck in the unfortunately? Or do we want to be the person that can shift? Once we let out all of that, what I call yuck, all of those big feelings, we can shift. But that doesn't mean we ignore what we're feeling. It just means we say, I am choosing to see that that is not the only explanation. I don't need to stay stuck there.
Absolutely. I love that. Now, we often talk about kids maturing, right? As they get older, they learn more. When is a good time for them to be able to manage or deal with those uncomfortable feelings in a more mature way? Like, are we expecting that as a 2-year-old? Are we expecting that as a 10-year-old? Are they expecting as a 20-year-old? Like, where does that fall? Because obviously, as we were talking about before, the prefrontal cortex isn't being developed until much later. Right. So when is an appropriate time? I had a client tell me the other day that her autistic boy was like, he was 18 and he was like skipping down the hall, and she was like, that's not how you're supposed to act, right? But who said, like, who gave a billboard that said I'm not allowed to skip down the hall when I'm 18 or 20 or whatever? Like, yeah. I wish I had that joy.
Yes. And I feel like you are setting me up to recognize that there really is no normal. There really is no, especially when we're talking about kids with any type of neurodiversity. But very honestly, I work with kids who are neurotypical. There's also no normal. Now, the brain fully develops, science tells us, by the mid-20s. But there's also something during the teenage years called pruning, where a lot of teenagers will act less mature than like a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old. So it's so hard to say. It depends on someone's personality, depends on, what their processing is. It depends on so many different variables. What I always say is let's not try to figure out what looks right. Let's figure out who our kids are and help them be the best version of themselves.
Okay, I'm just going to stop you there because I can just feel like all this emotion come up in me. And I don't want to cry because I won't cry because I cry a lot on this podcast. And it's just this idea that I just want to appreciate them for who they are, right? I don't want to make them feel like they need to be someone else that they don't need to be. And there is that expectation, right? Around, well, if you're a girl, then you must be the chef and the cook and the cleaner and the, supporting the husband. Yes, I love and support my husband and I always will. But then you have these other stereotypical things that boys do and not, whatever floats your boat. But let's stop putting these labels, and I'm not talking about autism. I'm talking about other things, these stereotypical titles that we put on these kids that, well, you shouldn't be an artist because, your dad is a bank manager and you should be a bank manager as well, or all of these things, regardless of whether you're typical or not. And it breaks my heart that we get that sort of drummed out of us through school, through life. And I don't want that for our kids. I definitely don't want that for my kid or for my children. I want them to be their true essence. And sometimes that can get lost in a way. And I'm sorry if I sort of detoured there, but it hit me in the heart.
That was so important. No detour. I think that was so important. It really was. And we have to recognize that the way we speak to and think about our kids often becomes their inner voice. And if we are constantly trying to change them, what they learn is I need to change, that I'm not enough as I am. So we can have the idea that, hey, I'm going to learn who you are and I'm going to help you become a version of yourself that is aligned with who you are. And so I'm someone who talks about big emotions. We don't want big emotions to control a child, but we want a child to respect their own emotions. So if we think about this in terms of big emotions, So I have a 16-year-old daughter who has very big emotions, and she still cries in school sometimes. Now, should a 16-year-old be crying in school? Probably not, according to the world.
I
But
don't know about that. I think I cried a lot.
right, exactly. But she gets looked at by other kids her age. And what she had said to me once was, when I tell myself I shouldn't be crying, I cry harder. When I tell myself that this is part of who I am, and I will tell you, my 16-year-old who cries has the biggest heart in the world. She wants to change the world. She wants to bring joy and light to the world. So I love that part of her. And I don't want her to make it smaller. But when she says to herself, I shouldn't be crying, people are looking at me, she cries more. When she says, this is part of who I am, it's also what helps me be so loving to the world, then she cries less. So when we accept some of this, it actually controls us less.
Another example I want to share with you is that I had a comment from a family member the other day, and they said that my angel boy should no longer be playing with trains because he was too old now, right? He's turning 12 in December, and he doesn't need to be playing with Thomas the Tank anymore, and this is ridiculous, and he's too old for this. And I thought, whoa, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, this is his regulation tool. This is his ability to create, to imaginative play, to be able to make sense of the world. And you're going to take that one thing and you're going to say that this is no longer appropriate because it's deemed by society that Thomas the Tank should only be played with kids who are 6 and under. Well, I am here on this podcast and I'm going to say, hell no. We are not going down that route. We are making sure that these kids have got the tools, just like we do. I finally figured out that my love language is touch, which is why I love massages and going for baths. And I will encourage my daughter, be like, can you just play with my hair for a bit? Because I'm just needing some regulation. And can you just do something? Because I'm so desperate for that. And I think that if we take this thing away from them, what do they have left in order to be able to regulate? And we want them to regulate so that they understand that flexibility, so they can understand those big emotions. Do you know what I mean? It's bananas. I find it crazy.
Absolutely. Yep. Instead of giving into what everyone else says, we need to make our own rules. We really do.
Yes. And what works for your family, right? Exactly. And that no one is there. I don't know anyone who's coming into someone else's house and be like, well, I've got this checklist and you're actually failing because you've got the Thomas the Tank engines out and she's still playing with those Barbies. Oh, that's she's gonna go downhill. No one's doing that. So let's just normalize that these kids need whatever they need in order to deal with those emotions, because it's hard enough going to school and just living.
Yeah, and if we think about what adults do to regulate at the end of the day in their own homes, it's probably not that much help. That's not healthy. We don't go around judging for drinking the alcohol that they drink, or adults do a lot of things that are not healthy. And you know what? Who's judging them? It's the same type of thing. They do what they do. We have to be realistic that some people need things that maybe someone else might not appreciate.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I really hope that the people in the back heard that. Mm-hmm. So in terms of improving self-esteem, because again, if we go back to the autistic cohort, a lot of them are feeling very, very much like they don't have that self-esteem, that they're worried or concerned about being judged, or not having a strong enough voice, or lacking or not being able to do something correctly. How does that look? And how do we improve that self-esteem with those big emotions?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's actually much simpler than people think, or I would say maybe not easy, but it is simpler than you think. There are really 2 components to healthy self-esteem, and we've already talked about one a lot. The 2 components are, number 1, a belief that we are worthy of acceptance as we are. The belief that even if I have big emotions, even if I do make social mistakes, even if I don't look like everybody else, I'm enough. That's number 1. And we just talked a lot about that. We want to teach our children that they are acceptable and worthy of love as they are. Not regardless of whether they play with Thomas the Tank or not, they're still acceptable and worthy of love and acceptance. The other piece of self-esteem besides self-acceptance is a belief that we are capable and can take care of ourselves. We can rely on ourselves. So where a lot of kids with big emotions struggle is they're told, don't respond like that. You're being too dramatic. You shouldn't be so upset. You knew you couldn't go to your friend's house. Why are you having that reaction? they're told often to do something, but they don't know how to react or respond differently. They don't know how to control their emotions. So they're told to do something and they feel incapable of changing. So not only do they not accept themselves because people are telling them they're not good enough, but they don't know how, this is where the capability comes in, to do what they're told to do. So really helping kids with improve their self-esteem is about accepting them where they are, and also saying, hey, if things need to change, if you need to be more flexible, I'm going to teach you how. It's always about the how, the strategies, because once a child knows how, then they can make shifts that help them become a better version of themselves or the best version of themselves. So again, self-esteem is about belief in worthiness and acceptance and belief in capability. So we work on those two areas and kids feel so much better about themselves.
And do you see that varies a lot between, let's say, a family who has maybe 2 or 3 siblings, whatever, one is autistic and then the other 2 are neurotypical, and like what that self-esteem looks like for the neurotypical children or child versus the autistic child?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on those two variables, because there can be neurotypical kids that, feel that they're not getting as much attention. So they may feel like they're not worthy, or they may be told, you need to have more responsibility. You need to pick up the slack a little bit more. And maybe they don't know how to manage their own feelings about that. So they act out a little bit. So again, if those areas of acceptance and capability are addressed, then they're going to be fine. If they're not, then they're not. So it depends more on how these beliefs are nurtured than anything else.
Oh, I love that so much. Now, we mentioned off air that you have a freebie that you'd love to share with the audience, and it's called the Yuck Curve. So can you just tell us a little bit more about what the Yuck Curve means?
Yes. So when a child is in a space of a big emotion or dysregulation, they're in a state that I call yuck. So yuck is just a blanket term for any uncomfortable feeling. So maybe they're tired or they're hungry or they have sensory overload or they're frustrated or they're disappointed, whatever it is, they're in some sort of yuck. And so a parent is going to say, okay, or a caregiver is going to say, how do I help with this big emotion? So I teach what I call the yuck curve, which describes how we help a child through an emotion. So the yuck curve is a rainbow shaped curve that represents what happens over time when someone is dysregulated or in yuck. So let's say a child is told, you can't be on devices right now, and they get really upset. So what happens is their big feelings get bigger and bigger. They reach a peak and they come down. So that's that rainbow shaped curve. When they are on the yuck curve or they're dysregulated, they're in fight or flight. And so what's important to know is when they're on that curve, you can't speak to them logically. You can't, and you also can't expect positive behavior, because when they're in fight or flight, you're going to see negative behavior. So they will return to positive behavior when they do what I call traveling the curve, when they get to the other side of the curve. And the curve is like a tunnel. You have to go all the way through. You can't get out in the middle. So what I do is I teach parents how to help their children get through the yuck curve. And that's what that freebie is about. How do we help our child travel the curve so that they can return to more positive behaviors, moods, and attitudes?
I love that. I think about the times that my kids were dysregulated, and especially it comes down to my more neurotypical daughter. And, she would have these big emotions and still does. And for her regulation is me. So she wants to be close to me, like the cuddles. She wants just that physical closeness to me.
So she has the same thing you do of the touch. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm like, it's so important that we can sort of disassociate from whatever's going on. She's been yelling, she's been screaming, she's angry, whatever's coming up. I'm just going to sit here and we're just going to hug, and I'm going to just rock you, right? I'm just going to rock you. And there's been times where she's asked me to just hold her. And I'm like, you know what? I would love to hold you. Like, because you're my baby. I don't have any more kids after you. You're the youngest. And I will, and I want her to know that she can come to me and do that, right? And she can get that with no judgment, with no, whatever, right? Have there been times where that hasn't always happened? Yes, right?
Good, you're human.
Yeah, right. And I remember being so angry with her one time, and she was like, can I have a hug? And I was like, no. And I closed the door and went downstairs, and then I literally cried myself to sleep, and then woke up the next morning. I'm like, I'm really sorry I didn't give you a hug. I felt so bad because I was like, I'm denying her that one thing that she needs Like, how dare I do that, right? Yes, I'm human, but I should be the adult in the situation, right?
Yes and no. I always want parents to give themselves a little bit of compassion, because if you're in a place where you don't have anything left to give, it's not always our responsibility to be the martyr that can just push all of our stuff aside so that we can be there for our kids 100% of the time. And even if we can, it teaches them that someone will always be there for you 100% of the time, and they will put aside their own emotions. So just give yourself a little bit of compassion is all I will say to that. Yeah.
I will definitely have a coffee and then, deal with
Good.
that later.
Good. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want you and others to hear that. Yeah.
Not at all. So where do people access the Yuck Curve? How do they get that freebie?
So it's on my website. It's rachel-bailey.com / I think it's just yuck-curve. So we can put it in writing somewhere.
Yes, I will put it in the show notes. I will also add it to stories so people can download it. I think it's important to have, because Lord knows, my Lord, it didn't come with a manual. Like, giving these birth to these kids did not come with a manual. And so we look to people like you to be able to go, well, you can be my manual. Like, can you figure it out?
I think too, there are some manuals out there, but they don't always work for our kids too. That's the other thing. When you feel like you found someone and all your friends are like, oh, you have to try this because it works for my child, and then it doesn't work for yours. And you're like, oh, I found the manual, but it doesn't work. So there's so much pressure. So yes, we have to kind of figure out what works for us and our family. Absolutely.
Yes, because I can attest that those baby books, they didn't work for our kids. So I'm like, I'm going to throw that stuff right out. But yes, it is. It's hard to try and find what works and what doesn't work. And again, being in a neurodivergent family, you are constantly trying and testing and measuring to see what's going to work and what's not going to work. So take information with a grain of salt, apply it. And if it doesn't work, we're going to, pivot and do what else. And obviously, for anyone who's listening, Rachel is so available. Like, she can answer questions. She can, where she can. And she's got her own podcast, which is, can you share that with the audience, please?
Yes. My podcast is called Your Parenting Long Game. So, and I have 380 some episodes out at this point. So there's probably one that will be related if you have a child with big emotions.
So good. I had a lot of people DMing me about this particular podcast, and very keen to hear how parents are supposed to manage these big emotions, because they happen on a daily, and parents just are really at their end point. They don't really know because they're not necessarily getting that information. So I really hope that, anyone who's listening, jump onto Rachel's podcast, jump onto her website, check out the Yuck Curve. There's so much information out there that we can really garner and make sure that we know what we can do for our kids. Mm-hmm. So I love that. Now, Rachel, before we wrap up, is there anything that you would like to add?
I don't think so. I think just having compassion for ourselves and our children, and really just being the best version of ourselves, which is not perfection. And for our kids, it is not perfection. I think that's it.
Yes, I love that so much. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate it. I know it is late over there. So enjoy, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
No worries. Talk to you soon.